On a sweltering afternoon, in a bustling urban neighborhood, the streets are alive with movement. The sounds of honking cars, chattering pedestrians, and the rhythmic clanging of construction workers fill the air. Dust rises from the road as a mixture of city sounds weaves into the heat of the summer day. In the midst of the chaos, people move in every direction, all with their own purpose, except for Elijah. Elijah, a bright and kind-hearted 12-year-old boy, stands on the corner of a busy intersection, his eyes scanning the street. Dressed in hand-me-down clothes that barely fit, he holds a small cardboard box and offers help to local vendors unloading produce from their trucks. Despite the gruffness of the surrounding world, Elijah always carries a smile and an innate sense of optimism. His actions often go unnoticed by most, but in his community, he's a known figure, a helpful, determined young boy who never asks for more than a warm meal or a kind word. As he helps the vendors, Elijah's thoughts are often occupied by the difficulties of life. Raised by his grandmother, he's learned from a young age the value of hard work, but more importantly, the significance of kindness. Elijah doesn't have much, but he shares what he has, whether it's a friendly word or an extra sandwich to a neighbor. Meanwhile, across the street, Mrs. Catherine, a sharply dressed elderly woman in her 70s, walks out of a charity event. Her demeanor is one of grace and sophistication, but as she approaches a nearby construction site, she's unaware of the potential danger. Her heels click sharply on the pavement, and the bright floral dress she wears seems almost out of place amidst the grime of the busy urban street. She looks around, momentarily distracted by her phone, unaware that she is heading directly toward the edge of the construction zone, where workers have left behind debris and open manholes. She's lost in thought, reminiscing about the day's charity event, and before she knows it, the ground beneath her gives way. The area is poorly marked, and the uneven pavement causes her to stumble, her heel catching the edge of a cement slab. Mrs. Catherine flails as she loses her balance and tumbles forward, completely unaware of the hole that's just a step away. The crowd around her doesn't seem to notice either, and for a moment, it looks like she's about to fall straight into danger. From the corner of the street, Elijah notices her fall. His heart races as he watches the elderly woman struggle to keep her balance. Without thinking, Elijah dashes through the crowd, determined to help. He reaches her just in time, grabbing her arm and steadying her as she stumbles. With strength that surprises even himself, Elijah pulls her back from the edge of danger, saving her from falling into the construction site. Mrs. Catherine looks up, her wide eyes meeting Elijah's with a mix of gratitude and surprise. "Thank you," she breathes, steadying herself as she regains her composure. Elijah, panting slightly from the adrenaline, simply nods and smiles, saying, "You're welcome, ma'am. Just looking out for people in need." It's a moment of pure kindness in the midst of a busy city, where such small acts often go unnoticed. But for Elijah, helping others is part of who he is, and this is just the beginning of a journey that will change both his life and Mrs. Catherine's forever. The sound of the bustling construction zone grows louder as a heavy construction vehicle begins to reverse. The ground vibrates under the weight of the massive truck, and the metal clinks of machinery echo through the street. Unfortunately, the driver, distracted by the noise and with limited visibility, doesn't notice the elderly woman behind him. Mrs. Catherine, still unaware of the impending danger, is focused on adjusting her purse as she walks slowly across the street, her back turned to the oncoming vehicle. Elijah, who is a few paces away helping a vendor, notices the truck moving in her direction. His eyes widen, his heart skips a beat. Mrs. Catherine is in the direct path of the reversing vehicle. His breath catches as he watches the truck draw closer to her. Time seems to slow down. In the split second it takes for Elijah to assess the situation, he knows he has no time to waste. Without a second thought, he dashes toward her, pushing his way through the crowd and yelling, "Ma'am, move! Watch out!" His voice is loud and urgent, but the noise of the construction zone and the vehicle's engines drowns out his shouts. As he gets closer, he sees the truck's massive tires creeping toward Mrs. Catherine, and his pulse spikes. With no time left, Elijah lunges forward, throwing his body between the truck and Mrs. Catherine. In one swift motion, he grabs her arm, pulling her back as hard as he can. The vehicle's tires screech loudly, and the sound of the brakes protesting against the weight of the truck fills the air. It's a close call. The truck's rear end stops just inches away from them, the air thick with tension and the smell of burnt rubber. Elijah and Mrs. Catherine stumble backward onto the sidewalk, their hearts racing. She gasps in shock, taking a moment to gather herself as she looks up at Elijah, who's now standing between her and the truck, breathing heavily but unharmed. Tears well up in her eyes, her hands trembling as she places a hand over her heart. "Oh, my goodness," she breathes, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved my life, young man. I don't know how to thank you." Elijah, still catching his breath, looks at her with a mixture of embarrassment and modesty. "It was nothing, ma'am," he says, brushing off her praise with a shy smile. "I just did what anyone would do. I'm glad I could help." Mrs. Catherine takes a deep breath, her eyes scanning Elijah with newfound respect. "What's your name, young man?" she asks, her voice softening as she tries to steady her emotions. "Elijah," he replies quietly, shifting on his feet nervously. "Elijah Williams." "Well, Elijah," Mrs. Catherine says, still trembling, "you are a true hero in my eyes. I can't imagine what could have happened if you hadn't been there." Elijah just shakes his head, his humility shining through as he shrugs. "It wasn't that big of a deal. I just couldn't let you get hurt." Despite his words, there's a light in Mrs. Catherine's eyes, a mix of gratitude and admiration. As they both stand there, the once bustling noise of the construction site now feels distant, as if time had slowed, allowing the magnitude of the moment to sink in. Elijah's actions were those of courage, instinct, and pure compassion, a stark contrast to the challenges he faces every day. He may have been just one boy in the crowd, but in that moment, he was the only one who saw the danger and acted selflessly. As the dust settles and the sounds of the bustling construction zone return to normal, the small crowd of onlookers begins to applaud. Some people cheer for Elijah, clapping their hands in appreciation of his selfless act. Others pull out their phones, snapping pictures and recording the scene for social media. A few call over to the construction manager, demanding an investigation into how the vehicle was allowed to reverse without proper visibility. Mrs. Catherine, still shaken but incredibly thankful, turns to Elijah. "You've done something extraordinary today," she says, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You saved my life, and I won't forget that." Elijah looks down at the ground, his face flushing with embarrassment at the attention. "It wasn't anything special," he replies quietly, shifting his weight nervously. I didn't want you to get hurt. Please, Elijah," Mrs. Catherine insists, her voice filled with sincerity. "I want to thank you properly. You've earned it. Let me do something for you." But Elijah, always humble, shakes his head firmly. "Ma'am, you don't have to do anything. I don't need rewards. I'm just glad you're okay." As the crowd begins to disperse, Mrs. Catherine watches him for a moment, her heart swelling with gratitude and a deep sense of respect for this young boy who had so selflessly risked his life to save hers. She glances around the neighborhood, taking in the worn-down buildings and the streets that seem to stretch endlessly without much hope. Something tugs at her heart. Mrs. Catherine quietly follows Elijah as he walks away, watching as he leads her down narrow alleys, past dilapidated buildings, and through streets where children play in the dirt. Eventually, they stop in front of a small shack at the edge of the neighborhood. The building is modest and weathered, with peeling paint and a broken porch. Elijah unlocks the door and steps inside, his movements slow and resigned. Mrs. Catherine stands frozen in place for a moment, her eyes filled with sorrow as she watches him disappear into the shack. It's clear to her that Elijah's life is one filled with hardships far beyond what he deserves. She stands there, taking it all in, feeling the weight of his circumstances bearing down on her heart. This boy, who had so much courage and compassion, is living in a situation that no child should have to face. That night, back at her grand, luxurious home, Mrs. Catherine reflects on what she's seen. The image of Elijah living alone in that dilapidated shack sticks with her. She cannot ignore it. A fire of determination burns in her chest as she picks up her phone, dialing her son, Mr. Richard Anderson. Richard is a highly successful real estate tycoon, a man of great wealth and influence. He's always been there for her, supporting her every need. But today, she's calling him for a different reason. "Richard, I need your help," Mrs. Catherine begins, her voice urgent. "I met a boy today, a young, brave soul who saved my life. His name is Elijah, and he lives in the worst possible conditions. He's an orphan, and he's been through so much. I can't just let him stay like this." Richard listens intently, and she recounts the entire day's events, the rescue, the way Elijah had put himself in harm's way without hesitation, and how humble and kind he was afterward. By the end of the conversation, Mrs. Catherine's voice is steady, full of resolve. "I'm asking you, Richard, to help this boy. I don't know what we can do yet, but I know we can make a difference in his life. He deserves better. Please, let's help him." Richard is silent for a moment, but when he speaks, his voice is filled with understanding. "Of course, Mom. I'll take care of it. If he's as remarkable as you say, we'll make sure he has everything he needs." Mrs. Catherine sighs with relief, her heart full of hope. Elijah's life is about to change, and she's determined to be the one who helps him take that first step toward a brighter future. The neighborhood is alive with excitement and curiosity as the sleek, black luxury car pulls into the street. The polished vehicle stands in stark contrast to the crumbling buildings around it, drawing attention from the residents. Whispers spread quickly, and heads peek out from windows and doors, all wondering what's going on. This part of town wasn't often visited by the wealthy, and no one expected to see such an elegant vehicle in their area. The car door swings open, and out steps Mr. Richard Anderson. His presence is commanding, tall and confident, dressed in an impeccable suit that speaks of his success. He carries a briefcase, his demeanor professional, but there's something else in his expression, a glimmer of gratitude and determination. As he walks toward the heart of the neighborhood, people stare in disbelief, unsure of why such a well-dressed man would be here. When he reaches the area where Elijah is playing with other children, the boy doesn't immediately notice him. Elijah is caught up in his own world, laughing and talking with his friends. his carefree attitude a sharp contrast to the luxury of the man approaching him. Mr. Anderson clears his throat gently, catching Elijah's attention. "Hey there," Mr. Anderson says with a friendly smile, looking down at the young boy. Elijah looks up, his gaze a bit wary as he meets the stranger's eyes. "I just wanted to take a moment to thank you." Elijah stands up, his initial uncertainty slowly turning to curiosity. "Thank you for what, sir?" he asks politely, still not sure who this man is or why he's addressing him. Mr. Anderson's smile widens as he crouches down, making sure he's at eye level with Elijah. "For saving my mother's life," he says, his voice filled with sincerity. "You didn't just help her, you saved her, and I will be forever grateful for that." Elijah's eyes widen as he processes the words. "I didn't do it for a reward, sir," he replies humbly, his head slightly bowed. "I just thought someone needed help." "That's exactly why you're special, Elijah," Mr. Anderson says, his voice softer, but still filled with admiration. "Not everyone would have acted like that, especially without thinking of their own safety. My mother is everything to me. You saved my world." Elijah's cheeks flush with the praise, and he shifts uncomfortably. It wasn't often that anyone spoke so highly of him. "I just did what was right," he mutters, still feeling awkward under the attention. Mr. Anderson straightens up and opens the briefcase, pulling out a set of neatly folded documents. He holds them out to Elijah, his expression now one of deep seriousness. "You didn't just save her life. You've done something extraordinary. I want to give you something in return." Elijah stares at the documents in Mr. Anderson's hands, not fully understanding what they mean. He hesitates, glancing back at the group of children watching from a distance. I don't know what you're giving me, sir," he says quietly, still unsure of how to respond to this sudden turn of events. "These," Mr. Anderson explains, handing the papers to Elijah with a steady hand, "are the deeds to a house. It's yours, Elijah. A home, a safe place where you and your family can live without fear or worry. It's not just a house, though. It's the beginning of a new life for you." Elijah takes the papers in his hands, feeling the weight of them, but still unsure of what it all means. His heart races, and his mind spins as he tries to process what's happening. "But I don't know how to take care of something like this," he admits, staring at the papers with uncertainty. Mr. Anderson smiles warmly, a glint of kindness in his eyes. "We'll make sure you have everything you need, Elijah. My mother and I want to help you. We'll provide the support for you to finish school, for your future, and for your family. This is your chance to have the life you deserve." Elijah's heart swells with emotions he can't quite name. It feels like a dream he never thought possible. He looks up at Mr. Anderson, his voice thick with gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much." The other children around them begin to gather, murmuring with awe at the exchange taking place before them. The neighborhood, once indifferent and skeptical about any kind of change, watches in silence as Elijah stands there, holding the papers that signify his new future. As Elijah stands there still holding the documents, he begins to process what they mean. The reality of the situation slowly sinks in, and his heart races. This isn't just a piece of paper. This is the key to a new life, a life he never dared to dream of. The house Mr. Anderson is offering isn't just a building. It's a chance for Elijah and his family to escape the dangers of the rundown neighborhood they've been trapped in for so long. Tears well up in Elijah's eyes as he stares at the papers. He never expected anything like this. Certainly not from a stranger. His hand trembles as he clutches the documents, almost afraid to let them slip away. This is more than just a gift. It's an opportunity that could change the course of his and his family's future forever. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much," Elijah manages to say, his voice thick with emotion. His words falter as his gratitude overwhelms him. He looks up at Mr. Anderson, the man who, only moments ago, was a stranger, and now is someone who has offered him everything. Elijah's instincts take over, and without thinking, he steps forward and embraces Mr. Anderson tightly, his arms wrapping around him in pure thanks. Mr. Anderson stands still for a moment, clearly moved by Elijah's reaction. He pats Elijah on the back with a reassuring smile. "You don't have to thank me, Elijah. You deserve this. You saved my mother's life. This is just the beginning of what you can do with the right support." The crowd around them, which had been quietly watching, begins to cheer and applaud. They, too, are caught up in the emotion of the moment. For so long, the neighborhood had been filled with hardship, but now it felt like something had shifted. Elijah's act of bravery, his selflessness in the face of danger, has inspired a whole community, and it feels like their collective hope is being reignited. As Elijah pulls away from the hug, he wipes his eyes and looks at the community surrounding him. "I didn't do it for this," he says, his voice cracking. "I just wanted to help someone. I never imagined this would happen." Mr. Anderson smiles warmly at him. "You did it because that's who you are, Elijah. You're a good person. And this is just the first step toward a future where you can do even more good." The crowd nods in agreement, murmuring among themselves. Some clap him on the back, while others stand there in stunned silence, moved by the sheer generosity of the moment. The local vendors, who had long known Elijah for his willingness to help others, now look at him with admiration and respect. They had watched him struggle, seen him help without asking for anything in return, and now they witness this incredible transformation. "Remember," Mr. Anderson continues, "this is just the beginning. With the right foundation, you can achieve anything, and I'll be here to support you every step of the way." Elijah looks down at the papers in his hands once more. His mind races with thoughts of what could be, of school, of a safe home, of a future that had once seemed so far out of reach. His mother and sister, who were at home in their small, run-down apartment, will have a place to call their own, a place where they can live without fear. With tears still streaming down his face, Elijah finally manages a smile, his heart full. He looks up at Mr. Anderson once more. "Thank you," he says simply, but the depth of his gratitude speaks volumes. "I won't let you down." The community around them continues to cheer, their applause ringing out, a chorus of hope for the future. Elijah's new home is everything he and his family could have hoped for. The house is spacious, with rooms that smell fresh and new, and a backyard that's safe and full of potential. Elijah and his mother, Maria, move in and start unpacking, the weight of their struggles finally beginning to lift. They are no longer worried about the dangers of their old neighborhood. Now they can focus on building a better life. Mrs. Catherine, the woman Elijah saved, visits often, bringing with her homemade meals, flowers, and a warm smile. She treats Elijah like her own grandson, and her affection gives him a sense of family he's never had before. Each visit, she reminds him of the strength and courage he's shown, inspiring him to keep striving for greatness. The bond between them grows stronger each day, and Elijah begins to see Mrs. Catherine as a mentor, someone who has shown him the power of kindness and generosity. Elijah excels in his studies, making the most of the educational opportunities he's now able to access. He begins to dream of becoming a doctor, a dream that once felt impossible. With every step, he realizes that his hard work, combined with the love and support from his new family, will help him accomplish his goals. As the story draws to a close, the narrator reflects on the message it carries. Small acts of courage and kindness can lead to life-changing outcomes. Elijah's decision to help a stranger without expecting anything in return changed not only his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. Through his actions, he demonstrated that even in the face of hardship, compassion, and bravery can make the world a better place. The story of Elijah's transformation serves as a reminder to us all. No matter where we come from, or the challenges we face, we each have the power to make a difference in the lives of others. And sometimes, one act of kindness can ripple out to create a brighter future for all.